Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale, Wizox AI, and Benny Keith Foods. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of Tips from Trestle. Today, I'm excited to chat with Cody Middleton, who's been making waves in the culinary world for over 20 years. Cody works as a culinary business development manager at Benny Keith, New Mexico. But let me tell you, this guy knows restaurants inside and out. He's a ServSafe manager instructor, co-created the Benny Keith Solution Series, and developed their front of house training program. But Cody doesn't just focus on business. He's also out there teaching dads how to be healthier through the New Mexico Young Dads Initiative. Whether he's helping restaurant owners streamline their operations or mentoring the next generation, Cody brings that perfect mix of expertise and heart that makes for great conversation. Thanks for being here today, Cody.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Aaron. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. When I connected with Joyce about podcast guests and topics and conversation, she recommended you because of all the work you've done with your customers at Benny Keith. And what I wanted to do was I really wanted to kind of get into some operational things. And I really want to talk about speed scratch in particular, because I think this is something that listeners who are chefs fully understand. But if you're new to food service, if you're a senior living manager outside of food service, it's probably a term you don't understand very well. It's actually something I had to comment on. I saw a video on TikTok the other day where somebody was doing this and there was this argument about cooking from scratch. And I had to tell them in the comments, hey, what you're talking about is speed scratch. And so it's kind of the same, but it's kind of different. But when you think about the challenges that we're facing in food service, especially when you work with your senior living customers, what are probably some of those bigger challenges that you see them facing?
Well, today, the biggest challenge that I see in the industry is this younger generation coming into senior living. We have folks that have had completely different dining experiences their whole life than their parents had. So the quality demands and types of variety and fusion foods are much greater than they were previously. So kind of being able to meet that demand with the labor market and the staff aptitudes that we have, those are probably the two biggest challenges kind of in tandem that senior living operators have in 2025.
Yeah, especially when it comes to high quality and low staff training or low staff experience. Like that's kind of a recipe for disaster when it comes to executing, especially the number of cuisines and the range of choice that our residents are expecting. And so I'd love for you to kind of explain the term speed scratch to somebody who's listening who maybe doesn't understand it very well, or maybe has never heard that term before.
So the best way I can really describe speed scratch, it's almost like you got to pull back into your memory when you were pushing a chair up to the counter and cooking with mom and grandma and how easy they made things seem. And you're basically taking some of the hacks that maybe have gotten forgotten. So we're using some ingredients that maybe are put together a little bit, whether we're talking bases for soups or sauces. Maybe we want to get into some further processed produce that's going to take a lot of processing time away from our staff so they could put their attention elsewhere. And that's really cool because that also gives you some really neat food safety benefits and using a lot of that pre-washed, pre-processed, ready-to-eat produce, especially anything that you're going to get through Marcon in their ready, set, serve label. Speed Scratch is really just hacking whatever your food item is and making it easier for you without sacrificing the quality demands. And some of that kind of furthers into the staff aptitude part where maybe we're taking some considerations into the quality of life that we're giving our coworkers and our team in our operation.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that last piece up about what does it do for the staff? Because we're constantly looking at the budget constraints. We're trying to figure out the labor mix. We still struggle with finding good quality staff who understand everything and trying to do everything from scratch to be able to kind of own and control the product that comes out can be really difficult in a senior living setting. So when someone's looking at Speed Scratch, obviously one of the first things they may notice is, oh, well, if I buy 10 pounds of onions, just ready to cut right in the bag versus 10 pounds of diced onions, they're going to see a price differential, right? They're going to see those dollars and cents and immediately think, well, I should just buy the whole onions because that's what makes the most sense financially. But I would love for you to kind of talk through that process from a chef's perspective, from an operator's perspective of how do you go about looking at products that can be used in Speed Scratch that can make financial sense in your operation?
Well, the Speed products lend themselves to senior living more than any other product. And the reason being is that let's say, for instance, we did have a fine dining white tablecloth restaurant where we had kind of a traditional brigade system set up. A lot of our focus as an operator is going to be staff training and bringing up our team to be able to be our next sous chefs and things like that. When we get into the senior living facility, it's not so much about maintaining this pace of growing your brand in your restaurant. It's about putting out the most wholesome, high quality food we can for our residents. So part of that conversation internally with your team is it's not about us. It's about all the people that rely on us for all of their nourishment every day. So we're going to maybe check some of ourselves a little bit, stay humble and recognize that these ingredients and these tools that we have access to, they're going to give us a really good end product. But when we're talking financial evaluation, it's really going to come down to keeping your prime costs kind of almost as like one thing. So we have to desegregate the labor from the food cost because they ultimately are coupled up as a prime cost at the end of the day. So if we're looking at your onions, for example, let's say we're looking at maybe a 10% difference between a whole and an already peeled or even maybe diced or sliced product. So if we are looking at all of this with our labor for processing the onions as a part of the picture, if our math breaks us even, now we can say, all right, by prep cook, instead of them coming in and they're spending an hour every day processing onions to get us through the next day parts that we have meals for, well, now they're going to have a product that is ready to use right away. So all of our labor costs are going to be washed out now because we're not paying that first an hourly. So if your price, when you factor your labor cost in, comes out even, now we have to look at it in the terms of our staff quality of life, because we are giving our staff now the ability to have this time to really focus on the care of the food production. And then more importantly, the care of the facility and making sure we're having really high standards for the way that we're rotating our products, cooking and cooling our feed appropriately, and then having really good levels of cleanliness and sanitation to get us through proper service.
Yeah. There are two things in there that you said that I think are probably a disconnect for non-food service people in senior living. And that's understanding that like the brigade system and the way the staffing of a restaurant works and all of the things that go into what you said there at the end about the operation and making sure it's being ran smoothly. When you're in that high-end fine dining restaurant that has that full brigade kitchen, there are plenty of hands to do work, right? To get things done. Well, when you get into senior living operations, like we know that the budget is tight, the way the staffing is done is completely different than that, because it's not based off of how much can I get on a profit margin. It's how much is my food cost budget per day, or how much is my labor cost budget per day. And so inserting these kinds of products, like you mentioned, makes perfect sense in the right setting to be able to meet that higher quality. And I love the way you kind of wove both of those aspects together to kind of paint that bigger picture. And so one thing that I hear a lot about is operators, especially in my world where I tend to work with smaller operators. Maybe they have 5 locations and they are averaging 80 to 100 apartments. They start thinking, well, my communities are too small to do those kinds of things. So I'm stuck with average food, or I'm stuck with having to do things a certain way, or I'm just going to have to raise my rents to be marketable to try and meet those same qualities. And so when you think about the community size, how does that affect or change how you would tell customers to approach their implementation of Speed Scratch?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
So the Speed Scratch from a produce standpoint is usually where I like to start, because typically those are going to be a little bit more affordable product, but it's going to shed light on that full part of the operation. The thing that you said, Aaron, that really struck me in this question was, I'm not real big. A lot of that relates to not necessarily number of beds that you have or number of residents that you have, but your actual physical facility. So if we look at a lot of further processed product, now we're also having the benefit of reducing SKUs that we're going to need to buy, but we're also going to scale down a lot of our pack sizes on product. So if we wanted to put out like a sauteed kale and Brussels sprout slaw with some carrots and things like that in it, we'd be looking at buying 3 to 4 different items to execute something like that. Or we could get into our product catalog and we could maybe go with the Kale Color Crunch from Marcon and the Ready Set Serve. And now we're going to have all of those products that we're normally buying in 40-pound plus quantities being shipped in, ready to use right out of the bag, whether we're talking cold, ready to eat applications or something we maybe saute or put in an empanada or something like that. And now we're looking at 10 pounds of perfect finished product instead of having to order in 120 plus pounds of product that we're now having to assign labor to process.
The other piece of that puzzle is the waste, right? When you think about, okay, well, I'd love to have carrots and kale bunches and heads of cabbage, but when you process all of that, like you can't necessarily control. Maybe Sarah is really good at processing and breaking that all down, but Joe over here, he has double the waste. And so now you've got that cost going out the door that maybe isn't even factored into all of that as you look at it.
Yeah. And that's the other part is that it's going to make a lot of your cost calculation super simple because we're not factoring in different yield loss percentages for all of these different items that we're having to build into either a spreadsheet or a food costing software. So it's going to streamline a lot of your price per day calculations and your portion calculations as well, because you get a 10-pound case and I'm doing 4-ounce servings. Hey, that's 40 even. And so it takes out some of that guesswork that maybe a newer employee might have, or somebody that's not familiar with your costing software if they get promoted suddenly or anything like that.
Yeah, a lot of different inputs when you think about all of that. And I think Speed Scratch can really kind of help maybe eliminate some of that as you're trying to make the process of understanding costs easier. One area that we don't really think about when it comes to cost savings or managing our budgets or time better is food safety, right? And I think it gets overlooked because we're just thinking about the product or the waste or maybe even the labor. But when you use a ready-to-use product like you've been talking about, how does that improved food safety really translate to cost savings?
So the food safety, when we're talking Speed Scratch, I mean, it increases almost exponentially. Much as I like to have anybody in the operation be able to come in and feel good and kind of get some of that emotional, I guess, instant gratification of working with their hands and producing something good, going from scratch from start to finish is extremely difficult nowadays with the limited labor that we have in senior living, because a regular scratch, you're creating extra tasks for you to do. Whereas when we're looking at Speed Scratch, we are hyper-focused on the task at hand and putting out good, safe food right away. So mixed greens, lettuces, anything that's going to be a ready-to-eat product that's going to be coming off of a cold station, salad bar, anything like that, all of the Speed Scratch items, especially for Mark-On with the Ready, Set, Serve label, are hyper-focused on that food safety component. So we're getting things that are being inspected in the field. The harvesting teams go through their safety inspections to make sure that there's good hands picking and harvesting all the crops. The facilities that cut and wash these have all of their water and chemical parts per million tested, things like that. So you're able to really confidently put ingredients on your menu that you don't have to wonder that did we wash that salad really good? And it's almost to a point of where if we have somebody on our staff and they're having to dedicate, an hour and a half plus of their day to cutting and washing lettuce, let's encourage them to start developing a little higher skill set where they're actually doing some cooking and some production and things like that, and swapping out an ingredient like chopped romaine or shredded kale or something like that, be a really big boost to their morale, because you're not saying, hey, I don't think you can do job X. We're saying, hey, I think if we help you with job X, we can help you do the next job that you want to grow into. So that's one of the other key benefits to it, is that you do get a chance to make things easy, but it also helps coach people up at the same time.
Yeah. One of the other aspects that operators don't think about when it comes to hidden costs of food safety is not the liability cost, right? I think everybody's very aware, if we have a foodborne illness outbreak, that's bad. But it's the reputational damage that can come from that, right? You're in a healthcare setting, you're taking care of, more frail or a more susceptible population. And if you're not taking care, it make those individuals ill, that's not going to bode well for you. It's a little bit different than maybe if it happens in a restaurant, because you're kind of charged in our industry with taking a higher level of care, a higher level of focus on the safety and the health of those we're serving.
For over a century, Benny Keith has been a trusted leader in the food service industry. As a broadline distributor, we offer an extensive selection of products, delivering to 21 states through 10 distribution centers. We can help you create a thriving culinary culture by pairing quality products with customized solutions that elevate your residents' dining experience. Our team of registered dietitians provide unmatched customer service by modifying menus, selecting recipes, ensuring regulatory compliance, and more. Quality, value, and service are at the heart of everything we do. Benny Keith Foods puts the care back in healthcare.
So, teaching my food safety classes, and we're doing our ServSafe manager classes here at our branch. One of the lead-ins that I like to remind everybody about, because let's be honest, a lot of the people that are the workers in the food service industry, they're probably here because they didn't pursue secondary education, and maybe they're kind of in an entry-level job too. And the entry-level jobs might not always be the real exciting job for a lot of people. So I like to sit down and remind everybody, you guys are the community first responder. Yeah. Especially when you're in a senior living facility. So we think of first responders as the paramedics and firefighters, police officers, and all that. But when your job is to nourish somebody and give them emotional satisfaction through flavors and experiences that they're going to have with all of their residents, you're kind of like a first responder of love. Yeah. And having some of that knowledge that you are really appreciated and that your job matters kind of carries them into taking care of the detail and the attention on the food safety, and maybe even making sure if you are taking a few things that are coming in whole, they're going to maybe have a little bit of extra care and not waste so much, because they know that what they're doing in that kitchen every day really, really matters to somebody.
How can this approach to Speed Scratch help with resident satisfaction?
Well, resident satisfaction, that's why we're all here every single day, is to make sure that we have folks that are thrilled with what they're receiving, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and anywhere in between that they might want a little pick-me-up. So focusing on the Speed Scratch just is going to empower our employees to have better care and coordination throughout all of the process, from receiving product to cooking product. It's going to make all your receiving a lot faster, because your quality checks on product are going to be smoother and quicker, and you're going to know what you're looking for. You're not going to have to dig around the middles of cases to inspect items. And then when you get into actually, it's the nuts and bolts of producing the product, we're in a place where we get to be really confident, because we don't have to wonder about the quality of anything that came in the back door. And we don't have to wonder if, I know I got these out of the Lexan that's labeled used today for this, but we've had a lot of staff turnover. Did this get processed and washed appropriately? Well, let's not worry about it, because we're using a Marcon Ready, Set, Serve spinach. That's triple washed and ready to go right out of the bag. Let's hit it.
There's so much to all of that with the service and the quality, giving the residents of today and tomorrow that kind of service and that quality is really key here. And so we're an industry that really is starting to understand that when we hire someone to run a kitchen for one of our communities, they need to really be talented. They need to have a background. And so a lot of chefs are coming in from the restaurant and hospitality and hotel world, seeing the advantages of the quality of life, the ability to still execute what they love, what their passion is with food. But one of the things that I have tended to see is when those chefs come in, they still want to maybe have that restaurant mindset of, well, we're going to prepare everything from scratch. We're going to chop our own fresh produce. We're going to break down our own proteins. And so when you're working with chefs that are in these communities doing this transition, how do you work on getting them to buy into this idea of Speed Scratch is your friend? You need to really look at doing this more in this operation. How can that impact their success in the industry?
So I always like to lead in with food safety when I'm talking Speed Scratch. especially when we're in senior and residential living. And really, that's going to start with the conversation about TCS foods. So any of your foods that once they're cut, time and temperature controlled for safety, meaning you have to be acutely aware of the amount of time that those are spent transitioning from cooler to cooler, how much time is being spent cut and processing, what types of procedures you have for appropriate washing of products. So I'll always start with like my cut leafy greens, tomatoes, and then I'll ask them if they ever have any melons anywhere inside of their facility. And the answer to those three questions is always yes. So asking them, well, how do you process, store, and handle all of these things? And if at any point you actually, we'll walk you through it. And if you see something in the operation that kind of sticks out, it's really easy to say, hey, I think we might want to address some of the storage here. Is this something you're real confident in? And if they're not 100% into it, then that's your opportunity right there. So let's take a look at the items that are most likely to cause a foodborne illness outbreak. That not only that, our environmental health oversight is going to be really critical of how we handle and store those products. Maybe we need to look at switching one of these over for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. And if it works well for the staff, for your purchasing, your receiving, rotating product, actually implementing it in service, let's take a look at the next one and go down. So maybe we'll start with some sliced tomatoes today. Hey, how are those sliced tomatoes? Yeah, those were great because all the slices are even. All our residents were commenting that they didn't get that really thick slice of tomato or, an end cut, or my slice was mostly core. Perfect, chef. Glad the sliced tomatoes worked for you. Are you using diced tomatoes in any omelets or any stuff on your breakfast action station? Gosh, yeah, we do have a diced tomato. Let's implement that next product and kind of build into it. Any larger events they might have, we've got some holidays rolling in soon. So a lot of places are going to probably have a meal where they're inviting guests, families to come in.
Yeah.
When you've got a big volume increase, that's a perfect time to implement some of these speed scratch items to where, okay, let's get you over the hump of that Thanksgiving meal. We're going to look at a couple of things that maybe if you've got a real critical chef, maybe we're at least going to look at like a diced mirror bomb for a few things, diced celery, carrot, and onions, and maybe some greens for a big salad that's going to be going out. And start them on some things that might be at least feeling like it's a burden to them. And just let's implement a couple of items, swap it, reevaluate. And if the customer's happy from a price point perspective, we're keeping them in budget. And then they just feel like their quality of life has gone up internally in the operation.
Yeah.
I mean, we're winning. Let's keep going down the winning road.
Yeah, I love that last example of holiday season. That's typically where I've seen some of the most wins in convincing these chefs to do that, because they're like, I got to do 20, 30, 40, 50 extra like covers for this holiday for all the families coming in, but I don't get any extra staff. Like I can't add staff for that because I don't get the extra revenue if I were in a restaurant. And so it becomes kind of a really easy win, especially when they see that they can maintain that quality. So yeah. Cody, as we wrap up here, I'd love for you to just provide maybe that one big takeaway or that one piece of advice you'd give these food service directors in senior living who maybe are still hesitant, right? If they're not convinced by now, what is the one thing you would tell them? Hey, this is really why you should get into and really dive into trying speed scratch.
So I'm gonna come back to one of the first things that you mentioned was the labor piece with all of this. The biggest objection that I get, Aaron, when I'm talking speed scratch and further processed items is there's this big apprehension for a lot of people to move into that because as much as we're focused on our labor budget, the biggest fear any operator has is that they're going to have to eliminate a job. And it's developing the conversation with operators in a way of that's 100% not what any of this is about. All of this product is about developing some of our operations processes so that we can focus on our budget a little bit better, improve our staff quality of life, and ideally operate in a way that, okay, we're starting to use products that have awesome food safety. Our staff is happier than ever because when they're coming to work, they're cooking and they're not cutting all day long. And maybe now we're starting to get some better reviews and our demand is going up a little bit more. And maybe now all of a sudden those extra beds that we were having trouble filling and bringing in residents to those extra vacant rooms, those are full now. And now we actually need another person in the kitchen. We're able to create a job by simplifying some of the tasks. So that's honestly probably the biggest objection I have is there's a deep-seated fear of I don't want anybody on my staff to not be on my staff because I've eliminated tasks. That's not what we're doing. We are creating safer tasks and better opportunities for our staff to understand more facets of the operation and actually get in and do what they're there for, to cook and take care of our guests and be really thrilled while they're doing it so that they can keep sharing that every single day.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm glad you kind of brought that whole thing full circle. Well, Cody, thank you so much for doing this. If any of the listeners want to connect with you, learn more about what you do at Benny Keith, or maybe pick your brain more about how they could get started with Speed Scratch and with this process, I'd love for you to share your contact information with them.
Absolutely. The best way to get a hold of me is going to be to send me an email and I'll be able to get back to service. I've got a full pen of culinary resource team members all throughout the South, Southeast, and Mid-South that do the same thing that I do every single day.
Perfect. We'll put all of that in the show notes for everyone. Cody, thanks again for doing this deep dive with us on this topic. I think it's going to be invaluable for as we grow as an industry to really elevate what we can provide to the residents we serve. So thank you for being a guest today on Tips from Trestle.
Appreciate your time, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.